Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the MuseCast. I'm Shawna Boren. You know that guy. He's Dan Kent. And let's give Dan Kent a round of applause for holding it down last week. Thank you, Dan. That was so kind of you. Awesome job as always. I got the flu for the first time in like years. Like I don't even like like my eyeballs hurt. It was so like everything hurt, like my eyeballs hurt. And I did test, of course, for COVID, and that was negative, and then tested. So that's how we knew I had the flu, and it was just not pretty. So it would not have been a pretty sight on the MuseCast had I joined you all.
Do you take NyQuil when you get the flu?
Yeah, to help me sleep. So the funny thing is, Dan, last Tuesday, when I was still so sick, we also had to take my son back up to school. And he had gotten his booster the day before. So he was a little groggy, and my husband works night shift. So he was, not able to drive. So it was left to me. And so I'm chugging Dayquil.
Oh, wow.
So on my drive up to Duluth, it was just not. And then it was like, bye, buddy, love you. Like just kind of kick him. Like I barely stopped. Like, it was kind of like a rolling stop. He like jumps out and it was awful. It was so awful.
I'm so sorry.
So Dayquil by day, NyQuil by night. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the NyQuil, that's my favorite part about getting the flu, because I sleep so good on NyQuil.
Yeah.
And I always have really cool dreams. So
I know.
But, it's a bummer. I wish I was in Minnesota during this, because I would have driven them up to Duluth.
I know.
I love going to Duluth. It's fun.
I know.
So,
I know. You weren't here for me to call upon. It would have been a bit of a commute for you to come up just for that.
That's a bitter drive right there. Yeah.
That's a tough one. For sure. Yeah. So I'm on the mend. Happy to be back again. Thank you, Dan. You're the best partner to be doing this with. So, so this weekend we celebrated, that's a weird way to say it, celebrated MLK, but we did. We celebrated the legacy and the mission and the vision of Martin Luther King Jr. and what he stood for and what he fought for, and how he tried to merge that with some really beautiful kingdom principles throughout his advocacy. So Greg, when Greg speaks like he spoke and utilizing all that he did from Dr. King, it's good, and it's a lot to process, and it can weigh heavy on the heart, just to, the realization of, how far ago Dr. King lived, and how sometimes it feels like we're still in that same battle in many ways. So so let's have your summary, and then we'll talk it through a little bit and see where we are, and maybe hit a question or two, and it'll be good.
Yeah, that sounds good. I love this sermon. It's so good. I think for me, just kind of going into it, maybe I'll do that as a summary. But for me though, I just love this sermon because Greg was able to take Dr. King's teaching and Dr. King's voice, and then also talk about theology, and then also talk about like what's going on in society, and just all three of these things that he was sort of weaving into this sermon. And I thought he just did a great job. As a summary though, it's tricky because it's tempting to just repeat everything that Greg said, and I don't want to do that because it's not a summary then. So I think the alternative then is this is probably going to be a very brief summary, and it's not going to do justice to how good the sermon is. So I hope people get a chance to actually watch the sermon. But before the sermon, let me just say that the worship was just so phenomenal. It was so good.
Word. Yeah.
Delon's family, and it was, that was fun. And
that was a good time.
If you're the type of person who sometimes skips the worship just to get to the sermon, do yourself a favor and at least watch the last two songs at least, because it was really good. All right. So Greg, basically he was asked by the MLK team to maybe talk about MLK's work and sort of a lot of the civil rights work in the context of Greg's thinking on spiritual warfare. And it's fascinating to me how so many groups and so many people groups will utilize Dr. King for whatever agenda that they have, or however Dr. King speaks to their tribe or whatever. And I think that that's probably pretty normal. But one thing that often gets neglected about Dr. King is his belief in spiritual warfare, and a lot of his motivation for how he was engaging racism was motivated by his presuppositions about what's going on the cosmic level in the world. And Greg really sort of pulls this out of Dr. King's teaching. And what he says is that, look, we are in the context of this spiritual warfare between God and Satan, and between these forces of good and forces of evil. And the people themselves are not the forces of good or evil. They are ministers of good, or they are victims of evil. And so, Greg, of course, what we've taught a lot here at Woodland Hills, our enemy is not other people. Other people, even if they are spokespeople, even if they're the hands of evil, they are really just the victims of this other cosmic force. And Greg really does a good job of showing how Dr. King sort of shared this set of presuppositions, and how this kind of spiritual warfare worldview really motivated his nonviolence. You wouldn't be violent against the victim of your enemy. It's silly to be violent to the victim of your enemy, because really they are victims of your enemy as well. And so nonviolence just makes the most sense. And then Greg kind of took the nonviolent teachings of MLK and kind of talked about in a way of kind of bringing it home, like, who are the people that make our blood boil, and how do we think and orient ourselves towards them in a nonviolent, more loving way, using Dr. King as a role model for how we might do that in our own lives. And so that's basically the sermon. But like I said, I mean, the sermon doesn't do justice to the sermon. There's so much more to it. And it's weird. Like, I've read a lot of King's stuff, but I feel like every time I hear it, I just take on these new nuances of how really incredible he was, and how what a great role model he is for me. Like, for instance, this is the new thing that I had this time. To be nonviolent. And when Greg shared that quote where Dr. King says, you can put us in jail, you can beat us in the streets, you can humiliate us, and we're going to keep loving you. And he, even to the point of being assassinated, you have to really, I mean, you're putting all your chips in on this worldview that there really is a God, that the gospels, what the gospels say about Jesus is true, and that by not doing this thing that our nature, our kind of primal sort of physical nature compels us to do, to fight back, to protect ourselves, to retaliate, to find retribution, to fight against all of those forces, you are betting that all of this stuff in the scripture is right. And that's basically you putting all of your chips in the middle. And the amount of courage that takes really kind of caught me this week. But yeah, so that's the summary and my kind of big initial takeaway from it. What did you think of it?
Yeah, you and I were chatting just briefly before we rolled, and I was just saying how, or maybe I even said it here, I don't know. I'm still a little loopy. Who knows? But I get so inspired when Greg teaches this kind of a sermon, but I also get so convicted. And I honestly was bawling when Greg read that quote that you just were referring to, that, you could do all of these things, and they did. Yeah. And we will still love you. Like, God, that is a high call. Like, that is a high bar. And we recognize that. I don't want us to ever come across as flippantly saying, love them anyway, no matter what they do to you. I mean,
right.
Yeah, but that's a high call that we can only do, I believe, with and by the grace and power of God. And when we do that, what we were doing is we are not cooperating with the evil. Like the sermon was entitled Forces of Light. And so anytime we resist that retaliation, that violence, that like we deserve to fight back, anytime that we don't play into that, we are resisting evil and we're actually being forces of light. And so I think it's beautiful, but holy buckets, I think it's so hard to do and to play out daily. And it's also interesting because, you know this, Dan, like we have conversations with our kids after the sermons, like, hey, what stood out to you? What kind of sounded a little off to you? Like, because we always want to give our kids an opportunity to push back and say, let's talk about this point. And that was one of them. Like, okay, they were like, okay, so really, what does that look like? Because my kids are a part of this generation that I love, that are so like, they have zero time for power over. They have zero time for people marginalizing others and discounting others and abusing others. Like they just are all about like fighting for the little people. And so they're like, well, what does that look like? Like, are we just supposed to be doormats? And I think that's an honest question that we have to wrestle with. And I don't think it's a one-time answer. Like, I don't think we can just hear this sermon or read a few Dr. King quotes, like you said, and then think, okay, we got it.
Yeah.
Because it's so nuanced and it's so deep and it's so layered. And I think there's a lot of people who like to, for lack of a better phrase, cherry pick Dr. King's quotes and, slap it up on their social media page or on or whatever and think we're good.
Yeah.
But if you got to look at it, and the spiritual warfare aspect is huge. So Greg talked about the powers and how the powers aren't the people. That's not humanity. There are like spiritual powers that also had free will, and they chose to rebel, and they brought in the darkness. That wasn't a part of God's plan. And so we are constantly battling against that darkness, battling to be the light. And that is an ever going battle. It never ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I totally off base here?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think, and not only is it nuanced, it's also very personal. And like a lot of the things that I guess this is what I would say is that, and Greg and I talked a little bit about this during the week leading up to the sermon, just kind of kicking around kind of thoughts and stuff like that, is that I think like for a white person to kind of listen to what's going on and to, I'm almost done with, what's it called? I'm spacing. Oh, the new Jim Crow. Duh. And so I'm almost done with that. I've kind of read it really slow, and I try to read like, one out of every 5 books I read, I try to read in this social justice kind of racial reconciliation kind of sphere. But one of the things that I'm learning is that there's just so many like personal things that like for whatever like whenever I have a breakthrough, it's not because of an argument about, it's not because like, what's an example? It's not because like, it's really compelling to look at like how many Black people are in prison relative to white people. I mean, that's like convicting. But like when I feel like real growth, it's usually because of an assumption that I have about a person of a different color. It's something that I experienced when I was a kid, or what my family told me about the issue. It's usually those very personal things that come to light, and I wrestle with that. And it's like there's no way to plan to touch those personal points in an audience. You have to just keep sharing testimonies and things like that. But as a white person kind of being a part of this, how I look at it is that, I think that there is, I think everybody, no matter what race you are, white or Black, but in this case, I think the most dangerous kind of culprit are white people, given the history here. But we all kind of carry with us these invisible hypocrisies. And I think that the only way to get at, when I say invisible hypocrisies, is like, I don't even see my own hypocrisy on a lot of things. And we need like all sorts of relationships. We need situations, we need teachings, we need testimonies in order to reveal those things that we keep hidden from ourselves, that we don't even know that we're doing. And so that's where I just think that a lot of this, it takes time. It takes a long time. I remember reading The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and just being shocked at how these evangelicals would go to church on Sunday the morning after lynching somebody. And it's like, it was just like, okay, now it's time to go to church. Now that we did our lynching on Saturday, and now we're going to church on Sunday to praise Jesus. And it's like, and then before that, there was, I can't remember what it was. I think it was in North Carolina. There was this vote to, I can't remember exactly what it was, but some type of like extreme segregation. And the governor who was kind of pushing for this extreme segregation won, which means that a large portion of the community voted for this guy. It agreed with this very racist segregational sort of move. And you think about that, you think about like how that many people shared in this racist ideology, how this many evangelicals saw no conflict between lynching somebody on Saturday and worshiping Jesus on Sunday. And now here we are a couple decades later. Where did all of those animosities and ideologies and beliefs go? They didn't just disappear. Right. They're still floating in the water. They're still in our system. And so, I encourage people, for me at least, this is what I've done, and I encourage other people who who look like me to just continue to listen, because you never know when those invisible hypocrisies can be exposed. And I don't think people want to be oppressors. I don't think people want to be racist. It's not like when you talk to somebody who, even in the Ku Klux Klan, it's not like I want to be a racist. No, they just have opinions about this other race. And the video that Greg shared about the black guy who befriended the KKK member, I mean, look at how transformational that relationship was. And look at what it took to crack the invisible hypocrisies of this KKK leader. It took someone making this great sacrifice. I guess I would just say, and I'm talking a lot here, but I guess I would just say we make it a lot easier to crack those invisible hypocrisies if we keep an open heart and open ears.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Dan. I think it's really impactful, and I think it's really important for people to hear. Like, I feel like we're in this weird place of like a bit of a reckoning and then a bit of a pushback. And we've been here for a while, but it just is, again, like just bubbling over. Yeah. And I one of the things I always hear is like, well, that I didn't do that. Like, I didn't do that. That wasn't me. Like, that was back then. And that is so true. And so what I would love for people to hear is, I'm not trying, and I don't feel like anyone of color is trying to say this is your fault. Right. But what is trying to be said is like, hear the truth of what we have been through and what we still encounter, and don't receive the blame for that, but understand that it is a reality, even though it's not your experience. Just because it's not your experience doesn't mean it's not a reality. Right. And so understand that it is a reality, and then just try to open your heart and your mind to be aware. And then when you do start to see it, push back. Be a force of light, because this is where, honestly, and I'm going to ring my community bell. This is where community can come into play. The church hasn't always done this well. Like you just talked about, going to a lynching on Saturday night and then going to service on Sunday morning. And then sometimes going to another lynching after Sunday service. Disgusting. Yeah. I'm sorry. That's disgusting. Yeah. So the church hasn't always got it right, but we have an opportunity to really band together as kingdom brothers and sisters. And sometimes it's hard to continually speak up and scream out for your own humanity to be realized. And honestly, just being gut level honest, sometimes I'm just done and I don't want to fight the battle. And so I need to pass the baton to someone else. And usually that someone else is a white person, who can say, I got you, Shawna. Like, you take a break and let me run this next leg. And that's the beauty of the kingdom community when we really do truly come together instead of fighting against one another. It's important to realize you're not to blame, but you're responsible for what you now know. Right. And for what you do with what you now know and how you can be a force of light moving forward. Yeah. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think a couple things that you said in there, just thinking of like the dignity piece itself, even though I'm not to blame for everything that happened leading up to me, the dignity implications of all that stuff, people are still bearing the weight of that. And I like another thing in the cross and the lynching tree, where, even when Black people succeeded in court to expose like violence, a lot of times, like if a mother lost her son to police brutality or to whatever, and even if they won the case, a lot of times the judge would be very explicit and send a message that, okay, you're right, and I hereby grant you a reward of $1 for your son, and would give like just these, insulting sort of awards, and like that has lingering effects. This is what you think of my son. My son is worth $1. And you are a judge. You're in the most powerful position in the local judicial system. You are someone who white people have voted to say that they can value right and wrong. They can discern right and wrong. They can value and offer justice. And you're saying that in light of all of that, my son is worth $1. That type of behavior, which was common, that has long-term effects on communities and on people groups. And so, yeah, I think even though I'm not responsible, I have to see that there are really loud echoes from these horrible things that happened not long ago. I mean, and are still happening now in the police system and in the prison system and all of that. So yeah, I think we need ears to hear, and we need to keep open hearts on it all.
Yeah, I agree. And that goes for all of us. I am biracial, and so my experience is different than someone who is fully Black. And I recognize that. And so whatever advantages, if we want to call them that, or whatever like gains I experience because I'm biracial and light-skinned, I have to recognize that and work to make sure that I'm just not hoarding that for myself. And like, okay, I'm good here. No, like, what can I do to help shine a light and help those who I'm not behind, because no one is lesser than, but I'm just saying those who aren't walking in as much freedoms because of others dehumanizing them. We all have a part to play. We all do. And we all have to recognize some of these systems going on around us and see what we can do to shine a light on that. So,
yeah, that's good.
During the sermon, one of the coolest things about being a hybrid church community, so meaning we have local folks and then we have our podregation from literally all around the world, and we do these live streams and we have the chat open, and so people from all over get in there and say hey to one another. You're a main moderator in their Dan, so you see this, and there are people who have comments and questions, and it's just a really cool thing to see. But one of the questions that was posted in the chat on Sunday, I thought was really good because I feel like it's a really real one. So I'm going to throw this your way and see if we can just wrestle with it for a little bit with the time that we have left. And I just want to say thank you, Barbara K, for posting this in the chat, because I thought it was really raw and really real. And I think a lot of people can relate to it. And so in regards to responding in love and not seeing humanity as the enemy and recognizing the powers that are in play, Barbara says, okay, yes, but what about the increasing bald-faced racism that we're seeing now, or the blatant disregard of science that we're seeing now, or the hatred towards immigrants that we're seeing now? How does loving others enemies come into play there? Like, realistically, how do you do that when you just get so fed up? And the reason why, Dan, I'm going to have you answer, because I told you, like, my response is, they're all a bunch of idiots. And that's not necessarily, that's just Shawna, like in a raw moment, like, but that's not necessarily a kingdom response that is helpful. So.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And the first thing I would say is God loves idiots. So even if that's true, it could be true. And God knows how idiotic I've been on things. So the other thing is, this is such a tough question that I'm not sure if we can answer it, but we can definitely give some discussion on it. How I think of it is like this, working in mental health, working with schizophrenics, working with people who were threatening to melt my brain with their psionics or whatever, and, just like and people who spit at me and people who, were trying to physically hurt me in their psychosis. I look at that and I know that, look, this person is having this psychotic experience and they're acting toward me based on these beliefs that are just delusional. And so I don't hate the schizophrenic, even when they're trying to throw their coffee at me. I don't. In fact, I feel really bad for them because I know how debilitating these delusional beliefs have been on their lives. And the enemy there is schizophrenia. It's not Joe the schizophrenic. It's schizophrenia is the enemy. Now that doesn't mean that I don't protect myself. Of course I do. We have quiet rooms and we have restraints and we have shields if a person is throwing chairs or whatever, and so you have to do what you have to do to protect yourself. But Jesus said in Matthew 9, it said that Jesus saw the crowds and he had compassion on them. And that's, I think, what we need is we need to have compassion on people. And how was Jesus able to have that compassion? And what Matthew 9 says is that he had compassion on them because he saw that they were harassed and helpless. And for me, it always helps. Like if someone is doing something that is really crazy and mean and maybe even violent, to just assume that they must be so harassed and they must feel so helpless and so afraid of something to be doing something like this. They're really no different than Joe the schizophrenic who wants to throw hot coffee at me. They have a different delusional belief that's compelling this very horrible behavior. And so I think that's the best kind of way that I can kind of wrestle with this and try to look at people who are doing things that I despise with some compassion, is to try to assume that they feel really helpless and they feel very harassed by something. And they're probably operating under a really wicked false belief.
Yeah, that's good. When I'm able to come out away from my initial gut response of idiot, and I take a moment, take a breath, I really do try to separate the person from the action, which is not always easy to do. And that's not to excuse the action, but it's to say the person is loved by God. This action is very well abhorrent to God. Yeah. So how can I love and ascribe worth to the person while condemning and not allowing the action? And that takes work and practice. So that leads me into nugget time, and I'm going to go first. I'll say my nugget and then we'll close with your nugget. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
And so it relates to what we were just saying. And in all honesty, whenever we see folks, the enemy, that person or group or situation that makes your blood boil, it's almost a mantra of mine. Like I literally have to say to myself, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Like hate cannot drive out hate. Responding kind for kind isn't going to change anything. It's only going to make it worse. And so how can I show love in this situation? And again, that doesn't mean that you just subject yourself to whatever. I mean, remember, wisdom and boundaries are all good, God-given things. But how can I be a force of love in this situation, and trusting that the Spirit of God will begin to reveal to you what that would look like, so that just a crack of light can enter into that darkness. Because if you respond to darkness with darkness, you just get more darkness. If you respond to hate with hate, you get more hate. And that is not the way of God. And it's not going to solve anything. It's not going to bring humanity to people. It's not going to bring dignity to people. It's just further going to bring us down into the mud. So that's my nugget.
That's a great nugget. Maybe another way to say that is, you have a choice. Do you want to perpetuate the problem, or do you want to be a counterforce to the problem? And that's really good. I think my nugget would have to just be to try to look at people as the victims of the forces instead of the forces themselves. And I think of the schizophrenia example is kind of what I keep coming back to. But I think that you think of like the what is it? The Salem witch trials. Look at the horrible things they did to these women. Just because they were believing that they might be a witch. And the fact is that if you really truly believed that there were women in your small town, and you got to think small town here, and these women had a pact with the devil, and they needed to sacrifice children, you would take that very seriously, and you would try to stand up for you and protect your kids. And now the belief is crazy, but once you understand the belief, it's like, okay, that it's wrong. What they did was absolutely wrong, but they were obviously overtaken by a really wicked, devious belief. And if they would see that this whole idea of witchcraft is absurd, they probably wouldn't have done that. And that's my hope when I look at people who are doing things that are just so wicked, is I just hope that when they see the ridiculousness of the beliefs that they are holding, maybe they will then feel profound regret, and there will be repentance, and there will be reconciliation. And that's the hope that I look at myself and everybody else with.
That's good, Dan. Thank you so much. Hey, you guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for chatting, and thanks for that question in the chat. That was really good. We really encourage you to tune in this weekend, because the celebration for MLK continues on, and we're going to have a panel, and we're going to respond to questions that we've gotten in, and just talk through some race and reconciliation and polarization and injustice and all the fun, good things. What a grand old time. But we do encourage you to tune in for that. Instant in questions if you have any, and then circle back with us next Tuesday, because we'll be right here. Well, Dan will still be in Florida, where it's a bit of a cold front, by the way, today. It's like in the freezing. 60s. Poor thing. Pray for him. Seriously. Yes, but we'll be here, and we will continue the conversation. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great week.